Could I request everyone to settle down? We're going to start the next session in 2 minutes. All right, thank you everyone for joining us after the break. We're going to move into the next session of Oceans and Populations, Community First Approaches to the Blue Economy. I'd like to invite our speakers on stage, Ms. Olta Manjani, Deputy Minister of Economy, Culture and Innovation, Albania, Dolapu Olateye, Senior Research Fellow, Energy and Transport Policy, Energy Institute, University College London from United Kingdom, Thilan Vijayasinghe, Chairman and Managing Director, TW Corp, Private Limited, Sri Lanka, Ms. Simone Smith-Godfrey, Founder, Blue Heritage Chamber of Commerce, South Africa, and our moderator, Moira Fall, Head of Division, Multilateral Development Policy for the G20, G7, OECD, DAC from the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development from Germany. Thank you. Over to you.
Good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very much honored to have a discussion this evening with an expert and practitioner panel here tonight. We all know we're living on a blue planet, and in fact we're meeting here in Cape Town where also the oceans meet, so it's very suitable to now be dedicating our time and our thought to oceans. Oceans are our greatest ally in the fight against climate change. They generate half of our oxygen, they absorb about a quarter of the global CO2 emissions, capture 90% of excess heat caused by climate change, and we know that maritime ecosystems provide food for about 3 billion people. However, we are not treating our ally very well. We catch almost twice as much fish as would be sustainable, and we know that from the SDG 14, if we look at the targets, only 3 of the 10 are on track to be achieved by 2025. And this is without mentioning other issues on pollution, plastics, and so forth. At the same time, we do also see some progress, and we'll be looking at that later. There are some agreements to protect 30% of the world's surface on land and on sea. We have more than 70 nations signed a treaty to protect the high seas, despite as we've been mentioned today, often the international situation not so conducive on finding agreement at the moment. And also the Brazilian G20 presidency has put a bit of an emphasis on oceans with a statement in the leaders' communique, and also initiating the Oceans 20. So we know that climate, environment, and people are intrinsically linked. And we know there will be no transition if it's not a just transition, and taking in particularly now the people of the coastal communities into account, and the voices of coastal communities, local and indigenous voices, that have to always be part of the solution. So with this, I'd like to turn to my panel and start with a general question to Simone Smith-Godfrey on the question of how these issues of climate change impact, in particular on coastal communities, can be addressed, but also what the solutions are that we might find in these communities in regard to climate and adaptation mitigation strategies, for example.
I thought for a moment I couldn't figure out the mic. Please forgive the technology blindness. It is a very interesting question that you're asking, and you amplified it by using the words just transition. The ocean's relationship with the land is not a relationship where sustainability traditionally has been applied upon. So the elements of operations, community, and environment has never before been measured in a mathematical manner to obtain not only justice, but also to get just transition from the previous state. Now, when the impacts of climate change became more and more obvious, and you see it manifest in oceans acidification, in mangroves destruction, you see it in less and less carbon sequestration, bottoms functioning properly. We looked at what is being done on land also when it comes to the oceans infrastructure that is required to combat this. In Africa, those oceans infrastructure, one, suffers from neglect, non-maintenance, and very, very few investment that has been made. As a result, I can cite a city who recently lost half of their power because 2 pylons was taken out on the coast that wasn't maintained. And for 2 weeks, that city did not have power, and I live in that city. It was horror. When you have these kinds of practical impacts of how our duty as land people are not being maintained and implemented and monitored on the oceans, there are gaps in the current systems that does not allow for coastal communities to have a very distinctive voice in those frameworks that is being set up there. Instead, those frameworks are more for the beneficiation of private sector, the enablement of multinational organizations infiltrating oceans territories, and it is not replicated on the actual community who lives in that environment. These kinds of impact leads to coastal communities becoming disconnected, not having access to skills, not having access to their own resources, and some losing their culture and their traditions in the process. And that is something that I believe that a lot of focus should be put on for the next couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you very much for highlighting these points. One of the important issues you mentioned was investment. This I'd like to take up with you, Tilan Vijayasinghe. You have a broad experience both in the investment sector, but also working on policy and the question of how also large-scale investment can benefit coastal community. Would you like to bring in this perspective, please?
Yes, thank you again. It's a privilege to be present here in the presence of President Thabo Mbeki. Thanks for the question. Just by way of a very short introduction, I was an investment banker in the 90s when I was headhunted in the late 90s by the then government, and a team of us, all of whom were in our 20s and 30s, we pioneered public-private partnerships in Sri Lanka. And 26 some years later, we've financially closed over $2.2 billion of PPP projects ranging from renewable energy to special economic zones to digitization. And now I run my own investment bank, acting as a bridge between the government and the private sector in sound project design. And in that context, I would like to answer your question via actually a practical example of where a very large investment project that was doing a sea reclamation to create a brand new township next to the central business district of Sri Lanka was faced with public interest litigation via the fishery community, stating that the environment impact assessment study was inadequate. And I was asked by the then Prime Minister to carry out a fresh EIA into the entire project, and it resulted in the project's investor contributing $5 million to the upliftment of the livelihoods of the fishery community, and that entire program was designed after carrying out a comprehensive survey of the fishing communities that were impacted by the dredging ships that were dredging for sand. Even though the environment impact assessment imposed stringent conditions on where and how dredging should happen when you reclaim the coast, what was quite interesting was through that survey, we found out a whole host of other issues that were impacting the fishery community. We discovered that the government was one of the biggest polluters of the ocean by releasing raw sewage. And that resulted in the Asian Development Bank coming in and funding that element of it. So the point I'm trying to make here is that at the time of undertaking large-scale investment projects, it is important that all of the stakeholders, the financiers, and the government look at the integrity of the environment impact assessment process and ensure that EIAs are implemented in a manner that generates confidence within the community at large, and the implementation of these EIAs are adequately monitored and documented. So that was one of the key lessons, and it's very important that one more final point is that when financiers finance such large projects, that this financing is dovetailed with an element of philanthropic funding or grant funding so that changes can happen at the community level where not necessarily where there's a private sector involvement or return. And in this situation, of course, the private sector was compelled to provide funding in order to support some of the philanthropic work that occurred to uplift the coastal communities stemming from the impact of the dredging project.
Thank you very much. Also for underlying this important point of, even if there are instruments in place like environmental impact assessments, maybe the question of how they are applied and whether they are really addressed within communities makes a big difference. So focusing maybe within the communities, we know they are very diverse, but I would like to particularly highlight now and turn to you, Olta Magnani, the question of gender sensitivity in the blue economy. So this is a question of how women can be skilled, upskilled, and also empowered. Again, how we can use the knowledge that is perhaps in the community, specifically amongst women in this case, to contribute to sustainable blue economies.
Thank you for the question. It's really important because reskilling and upskilling is really the headline or the highlight of today's discussions in the labor market. There is a very interesting study by the European Training Foundation which actually finds that by 2030, around 80% of the jobs that as we know them today, they won't be existing in the form that we know them today. And it's already happening, and that is in 6 years. 2030 is really around the corner. So this goes to show that the discussion is much broader. It does not relate only to the coastal displacement and the climate change, the need for reskilling and upskilling the population, but it also relates to bigger discussions such as how is the technology and the fast progress of the technological development and also the twin transition, the green and digital transition affecting the jobs today. So I would like to see it also from a broader perspective. And all these factors actually have an impact on the dire need to actually reskill and upskill the whole population, and particularly marginalized groups like women who actually are in danger of having less access to the labor market than compared to men. So I would like to suggest some, let's say, solutions or policies that governments can focus in terms of helping the reskilling and upskilling of the population, while also making sure that women are not left behind. One of them is, of course, economic empowerment, and by creating equitable economic systems and also promoting labor rights through designing specifically tailored programs with women in mind. One example that I could illustrate by bringing Albania into the equation is the employment promotion programs. They are usually programs that are highly subsidized by the government in order to ensure the intermediation of women, and not only, including all the marginalized groups in the society, where their salaries are subsidized for a certain period of time. This is, of course, the first step of the intermediation in order to make sure that they keep the job place in the labor market. The gender components are really interesting because apart from the subsidy of the salary for a short period of time, we also give subsidies for childcare and for the covering the transportation costs. Because sometimes women do not have access to the labor market because the place where they reside is actually too far from the place where they have to go to work. So basically these two particular components really, really help women to get access in the labor market. The other very important factor is, of course, access to capital. Access to capital first through ownership, because we know that in many countries the ownership rights, they are passed down to the male line, and in some cases women really let's say lag behind in terms of the ownership rights. It's quite a coincidence that before coming to this panel I was scrolling on Instagram and I had a look at this very interesting video that was posted by the World Economic Forum, which showed a very good example of a woman entrepreneur in Tanzania. After her husband passed away, she was faced with the challenges of taking care of 3 children, and the only property that she was left was a cow. So she was milking the cow, trying to feed her kids, but also trying to sell and set some money aside. She had a hard time to actually have access to microloans because you know, she did not have any collateral to back up the loan. So she came up with this idea of setting up her own let's say organization, her own fund, where she helps other women to get access to microloans, and where women can actually use as collateral cows or whatever little ownership they have or whatever little property they have. So it's really about coming up with innovative ideas on how to get women on board. Apart from the classical examples that we know, of course, that is the Grameen Bank or other let's say, institutions that lend microloans to women, it's also about coming up with innovative ideas. Another important aspect that I would like to highlight is capacity building through skills development. And I cannot highlight enough the importance of vocational training nowadays. Everyone can go actually to the classical, let's say, training and education, which is high school, university, master's, PhD, whatever, but I really want to illustrate this with another example. I come from a country that has 450 kilometers of coastline, and actually tourism is one of the fastest developing sectors in the country with the highest value added in the economic growth. And actually a chef right now in Albania, which are in very high demand because of the growth of tourism, is really getting paid twice or threefold the salary of a minister. So despite not having a university degree, despite not having invested loads of time and money through the education, just through vocational education, which in the best case scenario, you have to study 2 years, and in the worst, in times of time investment, 4 years, and you get a degree that is so much and in so high demand that even the salary or the revenues for the rest of your life, they are going to be much higher than in other professions. So basically, vocational education is really important. Other important aspects are, of course, mentorship of women and creating women cooperatives where they can actually do knowledge sharing with each other and learning from the best examples. And the last, and this is the last point that I want to make, is to have actually gender inclusive policy design. Basically, what we are doing in close collaboration also with the World Bank is to have inclusive policies that are actually involving also gender budgeting and also setting quotas. So basically, doing gender budgeting, it means that you tailor the policies with women in mind, what serves them best. And also having almost 70% of the cabinet women, in our case, it really helps because the policymakers are there also to understand what are the women needs and how they can be served better. And of course, the last component is digitalization and technology and how we can leverage technology to include women in policy making and how to help women integrate in the labor market. Just a little statistics here. Studies show that countries that use internet by 10 percentage points more, this has an impact on the economic growth by almost 1.4 percentage points. So this goes to show that using technology and using the innovative ways of getting more women on board really helps economic growth to start with, and of course their integration in the labor market.
Thank you very much. That was a very comprehensive framework, I think, regarding gender-sensitive approaches, which are highly applicable to this question here with the coastal communities and the blue economy, but I think even beyond that, I think you've set out an excellent framework. Picking up maybe on the policy element, I'd like to turn to Dolapo Oloteye. And I mentioned it earlier as well, this is happening. We had different examples from different places around the world. We've had examples from different sectors regarding coastal questions, fisheries, shipping, tourism. What are the multilateral frameworks that you see in place regarding sort of a sustainable, inclusive blue economy? Or maybe also what are the gaps? We've heard before, right at the beginning, maybe the voice of the communities themselves in shaping this framework, or maybe the voice of women in shaping the frameworks. But where do we stand in regarding multilateral cooperation and the ocean?
Thank you very much. I think I need to just follow the protocol, distinguished panelists and the audience. The function of multilateral organizations and institutions are to translate global ambition into local realities. Now, my background and where I come from is from international shipping, specific to the United Nations International Maritime Organization. And we're doing research there to help African nations, and currently I'm case studying 6 African countries, to understand how a changing policy architecture or a new policy framework in the IMO, for example, will result into a just transition that leaves no one behind. Now, the policy architecture that is being discussed is going to affect lives and livelihoods in Africa. It will affect everyone globally, but there's this term that we call disproportionately negatively impacted communities. And the coastal communities are also within the same basket. The question here is the function of the multilateral institutions. What we are moving into, and I think we've already started it, is the concept of blue economy. It is new, it is different, and we're all still trying to grasp what blue economy means. But the reality for coastal communities is, whilst we're given these new terms, various, we're badging them various names, the reality with the coastal community is they really require support from various multinational or multilateral institutions. Now, we're in conversations, for example, with the African Development Bank, with the Green Climate Fund, and various other institutions to help to support the transport cost increase that is coming. But there is something that I want to challenge us with, and a thought I want us to think about is what we have in the existing frameworks are built on a fossil fuel economy. We want to move into a green, blue, whatever name you want to call it, an economy that doesn't rely on fossil fuel. That is a huge game changer. And the existing multilateral institutions need to go back to the framework that they have. They need to return to the drawing board and begin to design what I would call the Blue Ocean Commonwealth. And this is where, and there was a session, I think 2 panelists session ago, where somebody was speaking about how we need to reframe the current discussions that we're having. And this is my position. We need to come out of the echo chamber of looking at existing frameworks and cooperate with coastal communities to design a new multilateral framework that works for them. And some of the ideas that I'll be throwing out there include, for example, developing a sovereign wealth fund that pulls resources from ocean-based infrastructure and industries like fisheries, shipping, and reinvest them into global ocean reliance and resilience projects. One of the things that we found from the case studies that we've done so far is that some regions in Africa, and specifically to ports and the surrounding communities around ports, are underfunded. They require technology improvement, and I can go on and on. Even ports themselves are experiencing obsolescence, and the communities around them are suffering because when you think about it, if you don't have the right waste receptacles, you don't have the right systems in place to make sure that the ocean is clean, then the closest community to that coastal line will be impacted. And so one of the things that we started doing, and I just came from COP, was to begin to highlight the need to protect communities around ports. And so this is what led to our discussion with the various MDBs, the multilateral development banks, to see how they can support our project to reach the people that need it the most. The second thing that I want to highlight as well is, in the discussion happening at the IMO, which really wants to transform the international shipping industry from a fossil fuel-focused system to a green or blue system, is that we have this idea that in 25 years, we will have a net zero outcome. But what hasn't been factored into this is how we're going to ensure that the people that will be touched are looked after. And so there's a discussion at the moment about a funding mechanism that will be set aside through a carbon levy that will be placed on international shipping. And the revenue that is generated from there will be pooled into areas where people are disproportionately negatively impacted. I am actually using this opportunity to call on governments and various policymakers to actually pay this attention. Over 90% of trading, and this affects food, it affects what we wear, it affects everything that we buy. Over 90% of that relies on international shipping. And what that means in essence is the cost increase that is coming as a result of this transition will affect both the people that are coastal, and those of us that are on land. I loved what Dr. Simone mentioned about, what she mentioned about the work that she's doing. I think we need to look at a multi-pronged approach to how we deliver outcomes for coastal communities and hold the feet of the people that are policymakers to fire to begin to transform our existing multilateral institutions into one that is universal, that incorporates oceans. And some of the ideas that we might think about is an enforceable universal blue rights treaty that recognizes the oceans as a global commons, and ensuring equitable benefits for coastal nations, particularly for the global south. This is not just about governance, it's about stewardship, and we need our multilateral institutions to help us to achieve a just and equitable transition with the provision of money, funds, that might not necessarily be profitable directly, but once we're taking care of the health of the coastal communities by ensuring that they are funded well, they have jobs, women are supported, and all these wonderful discussions that we're having, eventually, businesses will be profitable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Seeing that we already advanced a little bit in time, I would like to open for questions from the audience regarding the topics we have addressed in this panel. There's already a quick, I do not need to build a bridge. There's already some questions at hand. And then we will come back to the panel. We will take a few questions, and then I'll ask you to come reply to the questions, and then final statement at the end. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Sibule Lemabe. I work with Seon. And I basically sit in the OSIMS project meetings. I don't know, Simone, if you know OSIMS. It's a project under DFFE. And what they're doing now is they are developing, and they've developed a coastal viewer and some tools to protect operations at sea, tracking, aquaculture support, and assessing water quality. And basically this data is available on that coastal viewer and on those tools as well, right? So my question for you, and this data is available to communities, not only the scientific community, but government as well and other stakeholders. So what I want to know from you is, what functionalities or features would you like included in those tools to address some of the local needs that you, some of the local concerns that you kind of raised in this meeting, so that maybe it can be something that I can also just share, and hopefully that might do something. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very helpful question and comment. Are there further questions that you would like to address to the panel? Please go ahead. I will ask you to.
Yeah, very good evening, rather. My name is Vanshika, and I'm with the Asian Development Bank. I have two questions. My first question is that, as we look at interventions in the blue economy and ocean space, as is with other sectors, the major challenge is translating high-level principles to very tangible activity level, change at the ground level. So I'd like to know from your experiences, perhaps through personal anecdotes, initiatives that you've worked on, and how you've been able to translate from a very high-level principle to what the theory of change has looked like at a very output and outcome level, activity level intervention, and what would that look like in this space. The second is that marine thermal heating is a huge challenge, and now there's much more research which is showcasing that, mostly focused till now has been on the urban heat island effect, right? So heating in urban spaces. Marine thermal heating has come to the forefront more recently for regions, especially in the Pacific, Indo-Pacific belt. That means coastal communities are most at threat. What do you think can be done there, especially from the point of view of livelihoods and nutritional security? Thank you.
Okay, I didn't hear whether that question was addressed to anyone in particular, but maybe we will take it as a cross-cutting question. I think the first question was addressed to you, Simone. Perhaps you would like to come first, and also with your final statement. Thank you.
The OSIMS question is very interesting. It was developed by an organization called the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research. And for 8 years, I was that council who has more than 3,000 scientists and engineers I was the only maritime person. So I worked quite close with OSIM's system. And one of the highlighting issues that came out with OSIM's is that in Africa we have a lot of unreported, irregulated, and illegal fishing in our waters. And OSIM's provided us with a mechanism to look at our 200 nautical mile, where international fishing boats would hoover. They would just dart over that line and back the whole time. And that's how they got hold of quite a lot of virgin fishing stock areas. But OSIMS has got a much larger role in that as well, because it can also log the observations of the changes that are being affected on our coastal areas, especially where it comes to repairing and replacing our current oceans infrastructure that is deployed on our coasts, even in small harbors and in ports as well. And then also in terms of maritime security, which brings us to a very interesting state of affairs in Africa. We don't have coast guards. We use our navies to catch and release. We use strategic national interest to chase after common criminals because we don't have Coast Guard capabilities. And that is a functionality that OSIMS provides us with a door in to give us the basic observation status of how Coast Guard capability could be developed and deployed in this. So you do have other roles that OSIMS can also play apart from monitoring international traffic and making sure that adherence to the 0.05 sulfur cap is actually being adhered to. But you cannot have any of these if there is not two basic things that we understand about the oceans. One, there's a difference between marine and maritime. Please don't use the words interchangeably. Maritime is man-made, and marine is God-made. What it does when people confuse those things, it just brings a whole different aspect to the conversation. The same with blue and green. The blue economy has had many different definitions. I'm guilty of it too. I wrote my own definition of the blue economy that was published with the National Indian Maritime Journal in 2017, and I defined it as the sustainable industrialization of the oceans to the benefit of all, making it a mathematical concept. So we have in Africa that we don't have a grasp of that basic foundation. That puts us apart, that throws us out of the conversation because we're not understanding the impact of the conversation that we are having. I hope I answered the OSIMS lady. The other lady asked for practical implementation of projects on the coastal communities and marine heating. You see, mentioning very high-level mechanisms that is developed for people who have made their life from the oceans. I'm a child of the ocean. I come from a nautical family. I spent my time studying the industry from a legal perspective and then from a business perspective. Then I worked for 14 years in the shipping industry on different sides of the value chain. And then I became an academic researcher in the field. And currently I'm running a chamber in the field as well. The practical implications of taking very high-level solutions that are proposed to people who've never been on the ground, who've never walked in the shoes of those communities and understood that careers in the blue economy for oceans communities is not careers of choice. It's careers of necessity. There is no other economic measure out there to provide for your family. And when very complicated international mechanisms are made, that indigenous voice has not been called in and asked, what could be done practical. Simple example, for marine pollution, there's a brand new industry that awaits for it. Let the bylaws of coastal municipalities change so that they can own vessels, so that we can send the communities in with those vessels, go clean up the oceans for the first 12 nautical miles. Bring those things in, recycle them, scan them with technology, get their chemical composition, and make new things out of what we've retrieved. That's circular economies. That's a practical solution. But it's not a solution that we achieve when we're only focusing on high-level mechanisms.
Okay.
Practical solutions includes, for example, fish don't get scars because they rub themselves against certain sea plants. For somebody who's a mom like me who has a child who's scarred by eczema, I want that plant. I want somebody to go in, isolate that plant, make a product out of that, and please sell it to me so that I can take the scars off my son's skin. Those are practical solutions. When you look at fishermen who goes out, they have their own customs. They have their own knowledge in this industry. But research are disregarding them and not building up a research pipeline of projects that are coming from it. So we stand in danger of losing our indigenous knowledge. We stand in danger of losing potential research areas that has never been exploited before, simply because we're focusing there. We're not doing the nuts and bolts here.
Okay.
And that's my message today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for those very hands-on examples as well. They're very, very useful. I'd like to continue with our final comments. Tijan?
Yes. As a financial practitioner, there is a necessity for finance ministries and central banks of the global south to up their game in designing projects that would enable countries to tap into the climate financing market, whether it's blue bonds or debt for nature swaps. And there are many successful examples, from small countries such as Belize to larger countries such as Ecuador, who have reduced their debt loads by 60% to 90% by tapping into particularly the debt for nature swap markets. And that requires stakeholders to work together, and that would include the private sector, the financiers, the government, a strong PPP unit, and frameworks that generate sound project designs. I cannot emphasize that enough. And I'd like to conclude by giving just one example. And one such project design happened in the Maldives, where I was advising a state-owned company in order to design Maldives' first climate-adaptive resort that integrates with the community, because in the Maldives you have one island, one resort with minimal engagement with the community. And this particular state-owned enterprise, after an RFP process, hired world-renowned architects Foster and Partners, who designed the world's first climate-adaptive resort that would meet the requirements of a 100-year wave, that was fully integrated with the community, where fruit and vegetable would be grown by the community, supplied to the resort. And then a climate-adaptive design was created where luxury resorts to guest houses that would accommodate budget tourists could be designed, taking into consideration future ocean level rises. So it is this sort of project design that would then qualify for climate financing. And one more final point, in designing such projects, and when governments tap into instruments such as blue bonds and debt for nature swaps, they must be designed in order to leverage private sector financing. So government should not be looking at investing in isolation of having a multiplier effect of having 1x, 5x, 10x private investment complementing the public investment. So that's really the final point I'd like to make.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, time's actually up. I would like to give our final two panelists the opportunity to very quickly make a final comment on what's been said, and perhaps if you would like to pick up on the last question as well. Please go ahead.
I'll try to be very short. Building up on what I said before, we really live in a world where skills shortages and skills mismatches are really one of the biggest problems. So at this point, we cannot really afford, or better put it, we do not have the luxury to have any individual outside of the labor market, be them women, young people who can find a job, or long-term unemployed who actually need to be reskilled and upskilled in order to become part of the labor market. So that goes also to the gender-sensitive issues that we discussed related to the development of the coastal areas, which are facing a different kind of problem, which is the displacement. But the conclusion is that due to several reasons, be that climate change, be that development of the technology, or be that different kinds of transition, green transition, blue transition, twin transition, digital transition, we definitely need to reskill and upskill the whole population, particularly the marginalized communities.
Thank you very much. Over to you.
Just imagine somebody coming into your house and telling you how to fix a broken window, or telling you how to fix something that is broken in your kitchen. Nobody knows your home better than you. And I think when we think about displaced communities, coastal communities that we're discussing about oceans, we need to move into a more inclusive governance. And in this sense, is about co-creating a future that all of us can be happy with, including the coastal communities. They are not some demographic or group of people outside of the world. They are part of our society, and I think it's respectful and right for us to include them in shaping the future of what we want the oceans to look like. And policies need to reflect that. The processes must be community-led, not necessarily project-led. Community-led processes can result into bankable projects, because the communities can actually lead you to what can make money. Just like what was said, I'll give you an example. Fish, for example, in fisheries, the scale of fish can be used to create bioplastics. There's some people that are doing that. Seaweed can sequester carbon. And there are just so many things. And seaweed is also food. I think we need to just rethink and reimagine oceans and the communities in a different way that is respectful and inclusive.
Okay, thank you so much. So we've heard how technology is very helpful in accelerating the benefits of the blue economy. We've heard about mixed and clever investment options that are out there. I think it's been quite an optimistic panel today. Thank you very much for your contributions toward that. And I think the main message that we've heard throughout the panel has been listen to the relevant voices. Thank you very much.
Thank you. If I could request our esteemed panelists and moderator to join us at the front of the stage for a quick photograph.